Recording in progress. Good morning, everybody. Alrighty, so today we are going to do the lecture for How to Science, and then we will we have an activity that you'll do about the IRB as well. So hopefully you will find this enlightening, helpful, all that good stuff. I know some of you have gotten in your topics, which is awesome, but some of you have not. So here is just a clarification. I sent that email yesterday clarifying as well. So you have two things related to that due. One is the assignment we did in class on Wednesday, where you find two sources related to your topic from scholarly sources. And you fill out the form, and that's under assignments on Blackboard. And then the second thing is turning in your actual topic, and that's under the final poster project on Blackboard. And that is where you just write a brief description of your topic, and then you list those two references. So the activity on Wednesday was to help you with the topic. So hopefully you did find it helpful. So if you haven't gotten those in yet, highly recommend you do as soon as possible, just because then I can give you feedback. And then starting next week, we're going to do some more with the same. Basically, there's assignments you'll do in class throughout the semester that will help with your group project. On the topic submission, you basically just list the references after your little paragraph where you talk about so good question, Oliver. Yes. So you just include essentially the APA style bibliographic information for the two references. Yeah, good question. All right, I'm just checking everybody in as we go here. Alrighty. It's Friday, so I think we're a little lighter. So just a reminder, so we're all on the same page. Unfortunately, next week I have to be here on Zoom as well, because I have to get a negative test 3 to 5 days after my husband and daughter's quarantine period is done on Sunday. So I can't get that until next week. And I'm not allowed to go back to work until that. Basically, they're just making sure I didn't catch it later. And again, it's all in protection of y'all so that I don't come back to campus and immediately give you all this. So I don't want to do that. So next week we will be on Zoom as well. Okay. Any questions about logistics of anything coming up for the class? I'm going to try and grade your exams this weekend, so you have the feedback on those. Ariana, your question, yes, that's fine. If you didn't do the full APA submission, that wasn't super clear on the topics, you don't even have to redo it, especially if you did it on the assignment, you're good to go. Yeah, that's a good question, Debbie. My husband, while I'm teaching today, is taking my daughter to get a second test because she does need a negative test before she can return to school. Interestingly enough, his work does not require a negative test before he can go back.
So I read something about how you'll actually test positive for several months after getting it. And that's why a lot of schools and workplaces aren't requiring negative tests. They're just requiring you to be symptom-free for 48 hours before returning.
That makes sense. Yeah. So, but her school is requiring a negative test, so she might be here next week too. We'll see how that goes. Alrighty, so again, thank you for your understanding. I know I'm going to just keep saying that a lot, but I really do appreciate your flexibility. I know this isn't ideal. I know we'd all love to just like be in person, not have to worry about this, not have to wear masks, right? But unfortunately, there's a bunch of people that didn't do the homework of getting their vaccine and masking properly when they were supposed to. So the rest of us have to pay the consequences. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and I do have, let me make sure I'm sharing sound too, because I do have some videos that are part of today's lecture. So I posted this later last night, maybe around like 8:30 or 9. You know, it's just for some reason a little challenging to get things done with a, you know, a toddler who may not be the healthiest right now. So again, thank you for your patience with me. And I want to make sure that I leave time for the assignment today, because I think you're going to enjoy it. So if we don't get all the way through the rest of the lecture, that's fine. What we'll do is we'll just finish it Monday. This is a class that, since it's my first time teaching it, and since I'm really responding to how you all are filling out the perusals, we're going to be a little flexible with when topics start and stop. So I appreciate you all being flexible with that as well. And I will always keep you updated in terms of things that change for assignments, exams, all that good stuff. All right, so when we think about research in psychology, I think a lot of people think about this, right? But if I were just to say to y'all, what does research in psychology look like? What would you say? And again, you can unmute, you can raise your hand, or you can use the chat.
Lots of questions.
Lots of questions, good, yeah. Maybe if I phrase it this way, if you were to observing behaviors, good, Stacey, yeah, if you were to go do a psychology research study as a researcher, what would you actually be doing? So from the fact that everyone's super quiet, I can tell you're all like, I don't know, and that's fine. I'm giving exams and assessment. Yes, yes. So what Debbie just said is exactly spot on. A lot of psychology research looks like this right now, or in general. So it looks like filling out paper and pencil questionnaires, but more and more, particularly in the pandemic, it looks like sitting down at a computer and taking a survey. So for example, I am a collaborator on the Body Image in Nature survey, which is a literally worldwide. I think we're up to researchers from 80+ countries who are collecting data on it. And yesterday I collected my data for it. I used a program called Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which allows you to kind of crowdsource basically your survey. And so I was able to collect data from 350 people yesterday, right? That would never happen at Wesleyan. But because these people are readily available and willing to do these 15-minute surveys for decent compensation, you know, I was able to get that data pretty quickly. So yeah, this is a lot of what research in psychology looks like right now, is someone sitting down at a computer, taking a survey, you know, taking exams and assessments like caliber. Yeah, MTurk is magic. It's just, it's pricey. Otherwise, I'd probably use it for every study. So, you know, most of the time I can get some funding. This year I couldn't, so it came out of pocket, but that's okay. Other things, yes, we do rat research, right? And bird research, mouse research. You know, people go in, the behavioral psychologists, animal psychologists will go and observe animals in the wild. So in particular, we tend to study monkey, great apes, things along those lines, dolphins, elephants, right? But even animals that kind of surprise us, what we don't necessarily expect, including things like New Chaldean crows, for example, have some intelligence and abilities to solve complex problems. So we do a lot of studying in those animals, and it's not always in the lab. Real quick side note about Debbie, if you're interested in general in Amazon's MTurk, you can just Google it and sign up as a, I forget what they call you. It's like participant basically, and you get paid to do all kinds of small tasks. I'm done collecting data for bins, but if you're interested in that study in particular, I can probably tell you some more about that. Other things that we do, we might interact directly with our participants, like children, humans, things along those lines, or we might observe them from behind the one-way mirror. So we do have a one-way mirror in Allen Village. It's in the social science lab area across the hall from Dr. Ariel's office. And so there's an observation room and an interview room. And if you're in the observation room, you can do this, where the people in the interview room just see a mirror, and you can actually watch them. And it's been kind of interesting. We've actually had psych students in their research project use that just as a manipulation, where they put someone in that room and then see how the person acts if they think someone is watching them. So that's kind of interesting. But the social work students do a lot of their training in there as well. A lot of research in my area of psychology, clinical psychology, is just this: you're doing therapy with the person. So we touched on these before. There's what's called randomized control trials, where you might try a new type of therapy or a new variation on an existing therapy that you think will help people even more than what's out there. And you do therapy on people, and you get data from a lot of people who go through therapy. So as you can imagine, this can take a while, because the typical course of therapy for these types of treatments is 12 to 20 sessions, and you usually do that weekly. So we're looking at least 6 months a person, basically. So it could take a while to do these, right? But yeah, you doing research might just look like you doing therapy with the person. You're just implementing this new type of therapy and collecting some data. I had to include, hopefully you guys recognize this, I had to include one of the stock photos of Simu Liu, who is Shang-Chi from Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Apparently once in his life, for a day, he got paid $150 to do some stock photos. So I just love that and had to include one. But yeah, what he's doing right now, you might not smile as much as they are, but it's a big part of what you do when you're doing psychological research, which is after you get your data, you spend a long time with your computer and with a program like SPSS, right? This is what's on his screen in my mind. Analyzing your data, seeing where you may have significant results, and then figuring out how to present those. So, and these are just a small cross-section of what research in psychology could look like, right? So like Dr. Ariel does eye tracking research, for example. There's a lot of research being done now with various virtual things. They use VR to try to do some therapy research for people with like phobias or PTSD, for example. So there's a lot of really cool ways. The other thing I didn't include on here is brain scans. There's a lot of like fMRI research that has someone do a task and then sees what their brain does while they do the task. So psychology research looks like a lot of different things, essentially. Oh yeah, eye tracking software is super fascinating, and it's already come so far. So when I was working on my dissertation in like 2008, a friend of mine was working on her dissertation, and she was doing eye tracking. And it was like, there was one room on campus that had the eye tracker. The person she was testing had to put a thing on their head. It was like a sweatband, basically, with like a thing here. And then there was a sensor for it. Now, if you've ever seen the eye tracker that we have, it looks just like a little speaker bar that you put below your monitor, and then that will detect your eyes. So it's really interesting. It looks at like, where do you spend the longest looking? Where do you look at first? Do your eyes, like, do your pupils dilate? Which means, do you have an interest in what you're looking at? Things along those lines. All right, so, this is a section called How to Do Science, but certainly is more about some of the nuances of science. So I thought I would just remind us of what the actual scientific method and process look like. So the first thing we're going to do is ask some sort of question. There's something we want to know about, right, that we're hoping research can tell us. And it can be a whole host of different things. Oh, that's really cool, Debbie. They're doing eye movement research with movement seen in Parkinson's. Yeah, the eye in general, this is like a little sidebar, but the eye in general can tell us a lot that we don't know, particularly when we have these technologies. So like, if you ever go to the eye doctor and they take the picture of your eye instead of dilating your pupils, that in addition to showing the general health of your eye, the blood vessels in your eye are actually one of the first places they'll notice if you're going to develop hypertension, for example. And it looks like, yeah, now we're looking at eye movements in Parkinson's. So that's really cool. And I know, for example, in children who go on to develop autism spectrum disorder, there are actually differences in gaze within the first month of life. So again, surprisingly, vaccines don't cause them, Andrew Wakefield. So Jenny McCarthy, right? All right. So we're going to ask some sort of question, and then we'll do background research. And this is what you all did on Wednesday. Background research is where we do a literature review. We pull stuff from what's existing. A big part of what we try to do in psychology as well is find a theoretical backing for what we're talking about. And theories are sometimes very broad that try to describe everything, or theories can be very narrow, talking about one particular thing. Based on that research and the theory, you're going to come up with a hypothesis. Essentially, you're going to say, this variable is going to affect that variable, or these two things will be related. And again, it can be much more complex than that, but that's what you're going to test. And so you would come up with a methodology. And again, it doesn't have to be an experiment in psychology. It can be other things. And then you run that study, and then you say, is the procedure working? So for example, before I ran and collected data from most of those people yesterday, I ran 2 small pilots and had a question at the end that said, did you have any problems taking this questionnaire? And in the past, when I've done that, people have been like, yeah, this was the issue that came up. Yesterday it was good, so that was awesome. But yeah, you want to see, is your procedure working? If it's not, you want to troubleshoot it. Ooh, maybe I had a typo. Maybe, you know, I'm using an online survey and I accidentally put people in a loop, right, with directions. Maybe I'm not accounting for everything that could be distracting to a participant in a memory or attention study. So you might mess with your design. But if it seems to be working, then you go ahead and collect all your data and you analyze it. That you know, picture where we're all staring happily at SPSS, right? And then you draw conclusions based on that. And as you saw in your reading about open science, more and more people are really encouraging folks to pre-register their ideas so that they don't get the data and then they're like, well, that didn't work. Let's see what else we can find, right? If your results align with your hypotheses, awesome. That's what we're going with, right? That's what we're there for. But I would say more times than not, your results are only going to like partially support your hypothesis, or maybe even not at all. So in that case, this data becomes the background for new or future projects. You might need to ask a new question. You might need to construct your hypothesis in a different way. You know, it might even lead to tweaks with your methodology. And eventually, if you keep finding this over and over, it might mean you have to come up with a new theory or a revised theory, right? But either way, you should communicate your results. Now, this is what's really challenging, because in psychology, as well as other sciences, the things that tend to get published in the peer-reviewed journals that we've been talking about are the gold standard, are the things where you find statistically significant results. In my opinion, I think that these, where you don't find it, or it only partially supports it, are just as important, right? Because if there's not a relationship, that can be as important to know as if there is a relationship. but we run into what we call the file drawer problem, which is stuff just might not get published because there weren't significant findings. So people kind of get stuck here, and it can be very frustrating for the researchers as well. More and more, we're trying to change that. And the way you can communicate results goes beyond just journal articles. So a very common way to at least initially communicate your results is at professional conferences. So you might present a poster, which is kind of like a science fair. That's what you all are going to do for your last project. You might give a talk, just like a mini lecture about what you found. Otherwise, you might communicate what you found. You might talk to people in the popular press. If you have like a body of work, you might write a book. There are lots of different things that you can do with it. And more scientists in general and psychologists in particular are trying to think of good ways to communicate their science outside of journal articles, whether that's on Twitter, perhaps, right? Or through podcasts, videos with the journal, things along those lines. Alrighty, so your first reading, as I mentioned, was about open science. So I'm going to go ahead and show you this brief video that I think explains this a little bit better.
As a researcher, you're spending hours, months, or even years locked away in search of the meaning of life. Who knows what you're really doing? Are you getting the credit you deserve? And is the world getting enough out of you? Let's talk about this. Let's open up. Open science is making your research results available for anyone interested. It's not only about making your publications available and reusable via open access, but also making your research data open by following the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Open science as well refers to being transparent about your process and methods. The goal of open science is to allow others to use and reuse your results. This can be done before, during, or after the research process. This way you can, from the very beginning, make your research visible and valuable for others. Researchers, the professional community, companies, and society can benefit from it. By giving others the opportunity to respond to your results and using their feedback, you also have the chance to create a more authoritative work. What is there to open in open science? Open access, open data, open metrics and impact, open source, open repositories, open lab journals and notebooks, to name but a few. Interested? Here are 4 words starting with R to think about when engaging in open science. Reliable. It is important to evaluate the research in 2 ways. First, with respect to scientific principles and criteria, like validity. Second, with respect to criteria out of the professional context. This will help ensure that your results are more reliable. Reproducible. Transparency is critical when doing research. Open science allows you to clearly show what you've done to get the results you have. By being open about your methods, processes, and decision-making during your research, someone else doing the research again should get the same results. Reusable. This is the same R we mentioned when we talked about FAIR. By making your research results reusable, you allow others to build upon the solid foundation your research has already created in a given subject. Relevant. Research quality describes the measurable influence of academic research on the academic community. Research impact includes environmental, cultural, and societal impact, economic returns, and societal benefits. So follow the 4 R's of open science. Let your research be reliable, reproducible, reusable, and relevant. But I bet you're thinking, there's no way I can do this alone. Relax. There's help. You can contact the library, the often available institutional research support team, a corporate copyright information point, or a research data management office. There are also national initiatives that can support you, or the team, with the tricky questions. The NIE HBO, the LCRDM, and SURF are all there to help. These are all Dutch initiatives.
So that just gives you some examples of what open science looks like and the resources that are out there. A couple links I wanted to show you though, is, there are pros and cons to this, which I think we've talked about in the past and your article mentioned. So you heard a lot of the advantages, right? It makes it more open, it helps to build on science, but basically, one of the things we haven't talked about yet is an impact factor. And an impact factor is how widely read a journal is, essentially. And so researchers tend to try to publish in journals with high impact factors. And so if you're doing that, and those are the ones who are charging you, right, the publishers kind of have a market cornered where you have to pay in order to do it, right? Journals can vary across the discipline, especially open access. Some of them are not great. Author processing charges that can be quite problematic. And they mention here the predatory journals in passing. So I did want to talk about those. But before I do, I last night was like, well, I know that journals make a lot of money, right? But how much do they make? The largest journal publisher, Elsevier, makes $9.8 billion annually. Now that's their revenue, right? That's not their profit, but $9.8 billion, right? And yet they're nickel and diming these researchers. You can see some of the other big publishers, even the American Psychological Association. This includes their books as well, but gets $100 million a year just from publishing. And then there's one called PLOS, that's totally open access, and they're still making $31 million a year. So predatory journals are very problematic. So predatory journals basically scam you. They get people to submit things, and they may charge a submission fee and then a publication fee. And so on Monday, we'll circle back around and look at these videos on predatory journals. Good morning, Simba. But what I want to do now is to do this activity about the IRB, because I think that will be a little more fun, a little more Friday-ish.
We trapped the
So we'll go back to this. So basically, the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, is a body that's in charge of reviewing research proposals before they are completed, if they're going to use human participants. These are the members of our IRB. We always have psychology co-chairs because we do the most research with human participants. But then we have people from the various other schools represented, as well as members. And then you're supposed to have an outside member as well, which we do. We have someone from ODU on the board. And so what I've done with this activity, and let me go ahead and just copy the link for y'all, and I'll put you in the groups in a minute. So what I've done with this is I have created some mock study premises. I didn't do full IRBs because they'd take you forever to read. But some mock study premises, and then your job in your group will be to pretend you are an IRB and to review this premise and decide on several different questions. So hang on a sec, sorry. What problems do you see? And again, think about participant safety or confidentiality. Would you approve it? Why or why not? What revisions would you ask them to make? How could you study the same topic in a different way? And then just, do you think the IRB is important? So I am going to stop sharing. Makes it a little easier to do all this. Oh, there's this directly in front of it. Hang on. Good boy. Alrighty. So I am gonna go ahead and do 5 breakout rooms because there are 5 scenarios. Okay, and I will do the breakout rooms for 15 minutes, because that will give us about 5 minutes at the end, not 55 minutes, ooh, 15 minutes, about 5 minutes at the end to discuss them. And then if your group gets done early, you can either just talk about this stuff in general, or bot back into the main room and let me know. So pay attention to your Zoom breakout room assignment as you go in. That will tell you which group you are, and it is indicated on the document which group is doing which scenario. So as always, use the question mark if you need me and I'll come running. But in the meantime, go ahead and go in your rooms and address your scenarios. Our recording, yep, there we go. Alrighty, and that was resume, not resume, you know, also works. All right, let's start with group one. Emily, Aaron, Griffin, and Jaden. Tell us briefly, you don't have to read the whole premise, but briefly what the premise was, and then the answers to the questions for your group.
So basically, the premise of their experiment was they were going to have a group of researchers, or actually of their members, get into a physical altercation and see if people would intervene. They were measuring how many people would, their genders, and if they would intervene alone or not. So our answers were, the first one, we saw that there could be potential like mob effect with people just egging them on. If it is, since I mean, if it is like on campus, it is a small campus, so there'd probably be people who know each other, and then videotaping instead of intervention, so there wouldn't be complete anonymity. And then with the next one, we just said as the board, we would not approve this project because there would be a lot of uncontrollable variables and it's not practical. And we would ask them to create a new experiment. And we suggested that they could try a new experiment which individual needs like help after a fall instead of having people just fight and it be kind of chaotic. And we said that, yes, it's very important to have IRBs to create a standard of scientific process.
Yeah. Excellent. You actually responded to this exactly the way I did. So fun fact, this is based on a real IRB that I got to review when I was co-chair of the IRB a few years back. And it was a group of students for the SOCJ research class, and they hadn't run it by their professor at all before they sent it to me. So, you know, I sent it back to them and I CC'd their professor on it. And she was mortified and she just said, I cannot believe, like, I never would have. And I go, I know, you know, it's fine. So yeah, you all responded the exact way I did. Just no, come up with something else. Yeah, and I think another issue with this one, as you mentioned, is like people are gonna know people at Wesleyan, right? So it's pretty small. Alrighty. So rather than make group two try to talk about theirs super quickly, let's pick up here on Monday. So the Google Sheet will remember who was in what group, so we can use that to refer back to it. So we'll pick up with this and then finish up the rest of the lecture on Monday. And then we'll start into the material from Perusal 6 as well, just to, again, get you all on the same page. So thank you all for engaging with those. Hopefully you found it fun. Some of them were classic experiments. We'll see when we get to on Monday. And then a couple were studies we had here. So if I don't see you, have a great weekend. And I'll stick around in case anybody has any questions.